Hello and welcome to episode 28 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm Steve Elliott, and I'll be guiding you through the news. But first of all, let's take a look at our tokesignals.com bud pick of the week. As we like to do every week, we have some SFV OG this week, San Fernando Valley OG. And this, I understand, is a phenotype of a strain called Ghost OG, which was originated there in the San Fernando Valley. As you can see, it has some subtle purples to it. And as I found out this afternoon, it is very, very good. Let's do the news, shall we? We had a major development in the United States this week that you can read about on Toke Signals. 18 members of Congress called on President Obama to reclassify marijuana, citing high numbers of arrests, billions of dollars wasted, disproportionate effects on black Americans, and the relative safety of marijuana. A group of 18 Congress members on Wednesday, February the 12th, called on President Obama to delist or classify marijuana in a more appropriate way, at the very least eliminating it from Schedules 1 or 2. Particularly encouraging, even mildly surprising, was the fact that the word delist appeared in this letter. Any sane approach to cannabis, that is, any approach based on actual science, rather than the reefer madness scare tactics and conservative knee-jerk politics, demands that the herb be taken off the list of controlled substances entirely and regulated roughly like cabbage. This move comes in light of Obama's recent comments to the New Yorker that marijuana is no more harmful than alcohol, and that it was important to allow legalization efforts in Colorado and Washington to proceed. Notably, 17 of the 18 Congress members who signed this letter are Democrats. Representative Dana Rohrabacher of California is the lone Republican signee. The Democrats who signed are Representatives Earl Blumenauer of Oregon, Steve Cohen of Tennessee, Sam Farr, Mike Honda, Jared Huffman, Barbara Lee, Zoe Lofgren, Alan Lowenthal, and Eric Swalwell of California, Raul M. Grijalva of Arizona, James McGovern of Massachusetts, James Moran of Virginia, Beto O'Rourke of Texas, Jared Polis of Colorado, Mike Quigley and Jan Schakowsky of Illinois, and Peter Welch of Vermont. A big salute to those 18 leaders. Currently, marijuana is federally listed as a Schedule I drug. That's a classification for drugs with no accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. Because of this nonsensical classification, most medical research on marijuana is prohibited. It can't be prescribed in accordance with federal law, and it creates a host of tax and business regulation problems for state legal marijuana businesses trying to comply in good faith with all relevant laws. No drug should be listed as Schedule I, according to Director of LEAP, Major Neil Franklin, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. He says that limits potentially life-saving research into both the benefits and the dangers of a substance, and that guarantees a violent, illegal market for the product. That's even more true of marijuana right now, Franklin says, when after 4 decades of failure, states are doing their very best to find something that works, and federal regulations keep interfering with their ability to do so. President Obama just told the nation during his State of the Union address that because Congress has been unable to act, he would take executive action where he could on behalf of helping the American people, said Steph Scherer, Executive Director of Americans for Safe Access. The president has the authority to reclassify marijuana and could exercise that authority at any time. A bill to allow the drug czar to study the legalization of marijuana and no longer require him or her to oppose attempts to legalize marijuana was also introduced on Wednesday. And that leads us right into our next story. This bill, oddly enough, it takes an act of Congress to allow the drug czar to tell the truth, would allow the drug czar to finally say what he really thinks about marijuana. Under current law, the drug czar is required to oppose legalization, even for medical use, no matter what the science says, no matter what the American people support. This bill from Steve Cohen of Tennessee would allow the drug czar to take the same positions on marijuana policy as President Obama and Attorney General Holder. It's just a measure of how schizophrenic we are about marijuana that it takes a literal act of Congress to allow the drug czar to agree with the president. In any event, Representative Cohen on Wednesday introduced the Unmuzzle the Drug Czar Act of 2014, H.R. 4046. This bill would repeal a little-known provision of federal law that requires the Director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, the ONDCP, informally known as the drug czar, to take such actions as necessary to oppose any attempt to legalize the use of marijuana or any Schedule I drug for medical or non-medical use. The provision prohibits ONDCP from even studying legalization. Because of this ban, the drug czar and his staff are unfairly prevented from stating their true positions on marijuana policy and aren't even allowed to study the legalization of medical marijuana in 20 states in the District of Columbia or the legalization of marijuana like alcohol in Colorado and Washington. Not only is the ONDCP the only federal office required by law to oppose rescheduling marijuana even if it is proven to have medical benefits, but it is also prohibited from studying if that could even be true, Congressman Cohen said. The ONDCP's job should be to develop and recommend sane drug control policies, not be handcuffed or muzzled from telling the American people the truth. How can we trust what the drug czar says if the law already preordains its position? Cohen asked. My bill would give the ONDCP the freedom to use science, not ideology, in its recommendations and give the American people a reason to trust what they are told. Video of Congressman Cohen raising this issue to ONDCP Deputy Director Michael Botticelli last week at a House Oversight Subcommittee hearing is available. The link is on the Toke Signal story. And video of his opening remarks at the same hearing can also be found. The link's there. At the hearing, Congressman Cohen also explained to Deputy Director Botticelli how these policies and other anachronistic laws have resulted in a failed drug war and a generation of young Americans who believe the government has lied about the dangers of marijuana. Many believe the ban makes government officials too afraid during congressional hearings to even say scientifically accurate statements like the fact that marijuana is safer than alcohol, that it is safer than heroin and other drugs, when asked directly by members of Congress. It's extraordinary if you really think about it. A federal law prohibiting a federal agency from even studying an issue and then directing that agency to oppose any reform, no matter what scientific or other evidence emerges, said Ethan Nadelman, Executive Director of the Drug Policy Alliance. That such a law remains on the books is disgraceful. I pity the intellectually honest staff at the drug czar's office who are muzzled and censored and effectively compelled to lie when they testify before Congress and speak to the public, Nadelman said. A majority of Americans want to treat marijuana like alcohol. President Obama has said that marijuana is no more dangerous than alcohol and that legalization in Colorado and Washington should move forward. In January, Attorney General Holder said the Obama administration will announce guidelines that will make it easier for banks to deal with state-legalized marijuana businesses. This ban only applies to the drug czar, which means that the nation's top drug policy advisor is forced to take positions at odds with the president, who appointed him, and the attorney general who wages the drug war. With the ONDCP prohibited from further study of medical benefits or safety, Congressman Cohen has also introduced legislation to create a National Commission on Federal Marijuana Policy. This commission would undertake a comprehensive review of the federal government's current policies toward marijuana, particularly in light of the growing number of states where marijuana is already legal for medicinal or personal use. More information about this legislation is linked in the article on Toke Signals. Congressman Cohen on Wednesday also joined a bipartisan coalition led by Congressman Earl Blumenauer from Oregon in sending that letter to President Obama. So we have drug policy reform looking more likely on multiple fronts at the federal level, which of course is very encouraging news for those of us who have been waiting a long, long time for that to happen. Down south of the border in Mexico, change is happening as well. In Mexico City, we have proposals that aim to decriminalize the possession of all drugs, establish medical marijuana, and create a new regulatory structure for drug control in Mexico. Mexico is building on momentum throughout the Americas to dismantle their drug war. These two bills were introduced in Mexico City on Thursday, and they will reform drug policies in North America's largest city and on a national level. The first bill seeks to decriminalize the possession of marijuana for personal use, removes incarceration as the first response for the possession of other illicit substances, and creates a limited mechanism for the sale of marijuana if certain requirements are met. Possession of less than 5 grams of marijuana would not lead to any form of prosecution or jail time. Additionally, the bill establishes threshold quantities for cocaine, heroin, and other illicit substances, under which people who use drugs can be referred to a dissuasion committee, based on principles of collaboration and human rights that offers information and support to minimize the risks and harms of drug use. The bill also creates a mechanism for establishing spaces for the safe production and distribution of marijuana aimed at removing people who use marijuana from the violence of the illicit market. These spaces are not permitted to sell other substances, including alcohol or tobacco. They can't sell adulterated marijuana, they can't sell to minors or be near schools, and they must grant access to government health officials to educate consumers about the effects of cannabis, harm reduction, prevention, and treatment. If these and other criteria are met, the government's Institute for the Attention and Prevention of Addictions will permit them to supply marijuana. The second bill allows for the medical use of marijuana by removing penalties for prescribing marijuana and rescheduling marijuana from List 1 to List 3, reserved for substances with potential therapeutic value but that also present health risks. Furthermore, the bill aims to decentralize drug control policy and allow states the power to regulate the production, distribution, and sale of cannabis. On the heels of historic marijuana legalization victories in Washington, Colorado, and Uruguay, it's promising to see other countries and jurisdictions following suit, said Hannah Hetzer, policy manager of the Americas at the Drug Policy Alliance. The innovative nature of the marijuana bill, which combines elements of marijuana regulation models from around the world, demonstrates that reforms can be tailored to fit the local context. Marijuana has suffered immensely from the war on drugs, according to Hetzer. Amidst extreme levels of violence and crime, it's encouraging to see Mexico's capital city attempt to refocus its efforts away from marijuana possession and low-level drug offenses and to invest in reducing violent crime instead. The wave of change that's sweeping across the globe also reached Italy this week. In Italy, they have dumped their harsh marijuana law, and 10,000 people may be released from jail. Italy's constitutional court on Wednesday struck down the country's marijuana law, which tripled sentences for selling, growing, or possessing cannabis. That law has been blamed for prison overcrowding in Italy. The court ruled that the law, passed in 2006 by Silvio Berlusconi's conservative government, was illegitimate without going into details. Some estimates suggest 10,000 people could be released from Italian jails, which are the most overcrowded in the European Union. The prison rights group Antigone says the harsh drug law was the biggest reason for Italy's prison overcrowding problem. According to the group, 40% of all inmates in Italian prisons are serving sentences for drug crimes. About 62,000 inmates are crammed into cells built for fewer than 48,000, according to official data. The 2006 drug law classified marijuana and hashish as equal legally to cocaine and heroin. It boosted sentences for cannabis cultivation, sale, and trafficking from 2 to 6 years to 6 to 20 years. The drug law previously in place will now take effect again after the court's ruling. Crimes related to hard drugs like cocaine and heroin will once again carry longer prison sentences than cannabis. Neither the old law nor the new one made it a crime to consume marijuana, but both outlawed its possession. The so-called drug war, as conceived in North America, has been lost, and it's time to return to rational rules that distinguish between substances, said Franco Corleone of the human rights group Society of Reason. One of the conservative lawmakers responsible for the harsh 2006 drug law predicted doom. The ruling was a devastating choice from a scientific viewpoint, and in the message it sends to young people that some drugs are less dangerous than others, said Senator Carlo Giovanardi. We can't be telling kids the actual facts about cannabis, now can we, Senator? In Rhode Island, lawmakers this week introduced a bill to legalize, regulate, and tax marijuana like alcohol. This measure would establish a legal market for licensed businesses to sell marijuana to adults 21 and older. 53% of Rhode Island voters support such a law, according to a January poll. Rhode Island Senate Health and Human Services Committee Chairman Josh Miller and House Judiciary Committee Chairwoman Edith Agello announced on Wednesday that they will introduce a bill to make marijuana legal for adults 21 and older and establish a system in which marijuana is regulated and taxed, similarly to alcohol. Marijuana prohibition has been a long-term failure, according to Senator Miller. Forcing marijuana into the underground market ensures authorities have no control of the product. Regulating marijuana would allow the product to be sold safely and responsibly by legitimate businesses in appropriate locations. The measure would allow adults 21 and older to possess up to an ounce of marijuana and grow up to 2 marijuana plants, only one of which could be mature, in an enclosed, locked space. It would also establish a tightly regulated system of licensed marijuana retail stores, cultivation facilities, and testing facilities, and enact an excise tax of up to $50 per ounce on the wholesale sale of marijuana flowers, applied at the point of transfer from the cultivation facility to the retail store. A special 10% sales tax would also be applied at the point of retail sale. The Rhode Island Department of Business Regulation would be required to establish rules regulating security, labeling, health, and safety requirements. Most Rhode Island voters agree it is time to end marijuana prohibition and start treating the product like alcohol, according to Representative Agello. Regulation allows us to create barriers to teen access, such as ID checks and serious penalties for selling to those under 21. Taxing marijuana sales will generate tens of millions of dollars in much-needed revenue for the state, a portion of which will be directed towards programs that treat and prevent alcohol and other substance abuse, according to the representative. In New Hampshire, a bill to remove criminal penalties for marijuana possession got a public hearing. The New Hampshire House of Representatives Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee on Thursday, February 13th, held a hearing on a bill that would remove criminal penalties for the possession of small amounts of marijuana. House Bill 1625, sponsored by Representative Adam Schroeder, a Republican from Newmarket, Rhode Island, or from Newmarket, New Hampshire, and a bipartisan group of 7 co-sponsors, including Jeff Woodburn of Dalton, would make possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana punishable by a civil fine of up to $100. It would also make cultivation of up to 6 plants a Class A misdemeanor instead of a felony. Currently, possession of any amount of marijuana is a misdemeanor punishable by up to a year in prison and a fine of up to $2,000 in New Hampshire. That's the only state in New England that treats simple marijuana possession as a criminal offense with the potential for jail time. Arresting people for small amounts of marijuana creates far more harm than marijuana use ever could, according to Matt Simon, the Goffstown, New Hampshire-based New England political director for Marijuana Policy Project, which supports the bill. Granite State voters are sick of treating people like criminals simply for possessing a substance that is far safer than alcohol. We applaud state lawmakers for listening to their constituents and taking action on this important issue, he said. A sad story from Kansas this week. A woman's tragic death in jail after a marijuana arrest last month is being investigated. The January death of a 58-year-old Kansas woman in jail after being arrested for marijuana she had legally purchased in Colorado is being investigated by local authorities as family members continue to look for answers. Her sister alleges that jail guards stood by, ignoring her pleas for help. Brenda Sewell and her sister Joy Biggs had been pulled over January 20th in Goodland by the Kansas Highway Patrol for speeding. A trooper arrested them after he found a small amount of marijuana, according to relatives. Family members want to know why Sewell started foaming at the mouth and why jailers took so long to help as her sister and another cellmate tried to revive the woman. While in Colorado, Sewell had bought some cannabis to help ease pain associated with her ailments, as well as to manage nausea and to improve her appetite, according to her younger brother Rick Ray of Kansas City. Sewell had 31 grams of marijuana in a sealed jar when she was stopped by the Kansas Highway Patrol, according to Biggs. The officer claimed he smelled marijuana. It was a profile thing after he found out we were coming from Colorado because there was nothing visible, Biggs said. There was nothing going on. There wasn't a smell in the car, I can guarantee you. Family members are asking why the two women were held for days at the Sherman County Jail without being allowed to make a phone call after the arrest. Biggs said there was no working telephone in the cell where they were kept. Sewell died on January 22nd at the Goodland Regional Medical Center. The Sherman County Sheriff's Office refuses to comment until an investigation is completed. The 58-year-old had been treated for about 10 years for hepatitis C, thyroid issues, and fibromyalgia, according to Ray, who said she was carrying several medications for those ailments. She had some health problems, but nothing that was life-threatening. It was under control, Ray said. The jailers wouldn't give Sewell her medications because she kept them in a daily pill counter instead of in the original bottles, Ray said, and the jailers were unable to identify the pills. Sewell hadn't been feeling well, according to her sister Biggs. Jailers sent her to a hospital after she had been vomiting all day on Tuesday and then put her back in jail. When she returned to the cell an hour later, Sewell told her sister that the sheriff's deputy who took her to the hospital had told the nurse on duty that Sewell was faking it and just get some liquids in her and send her back to jail. Early on Wednesday, Sewell was feeling worse. Her eyes began dilating, according to Biggs, and she tried to speak, but was unable to form any words. When she began foaming at the mouth, Biggs told her family she begged for help from the jailers. As Biggs and another cellmate tried to hold Sewell up, they could feel her become limp and cold, and then she stopped breathing. We kept hollering and hollering, "Please open the door and help us. She's dying. She's cold," Biggs said, and they just won't. They kept looking in the window. Nobody came to help her. She began CPR on her dying sister. Finally, the paramedics arrived. Sewell was taken back to the hospital, and Biggs was taken to another room and told her sister was dead. She called a lawyer when she was finally given access to a telephone. She said that she felt that was most important because she felt like her sister had been killed. And then she made him call the family because she just couldn't do it at that point. She was too upset. At this time, as is typical in cases like this, the investigation is immediately turned over to an outside agency, reads a statement from the Sherman County Sheriff's Office, which said proper procedure was followed in the confinement, treatment, and care of Brenda Sewell. In Washington State this week, the marijuana rules under legalization measure I-502 could result in as few as 22 grow licenses statewide. Washington State's absurdly low cap on recreational marijuana cultivation could create a number of consequences for the state's new legal cannabis industry, almost none of them good. Among the possible, even likely effects of the too low production cap include high prices, inventory shortages, and concentration of cultivation licenses in just a few wealthy hands. Last year, the Washington State Liquor Control Board established a 2 million square foot canopy cap on the area used for recreational marijuana cultivation in the state under I-502. It turns out that 2 million square feet of canopy space, that's a rather arcane way of measurement on the face of it, equals about 46 acres of growing weed. Regulators opted for the canopy measurement rather than using plant counts. If the Liquor Control Board's number crunchers are in the neighborhood of accuracy, and there's of course no guarantee they are, since their actions and pronouncements haven't been particularly confidence-inspiring so far, 2 million square feet of canopy space can produce about 40 metric tons of usable marijuana and 40 metric tons of production for cannabis concentrates. 40 metric tons almost certainly equals 1 shit ton of cannabis, according to our involved scientific calculations, but there's one problem with that amount. You see, Washington State marijuana users burn through 175 metric tons of weed each year, according to a recent study from the Rand Corporation. That means from the get-go, the Liquor Control Board is ceding 3/4 of the state's marijuana sales to the black market. With production unwisely capped at just 1/4 of what state residents already consume, it doesn't take Einstein-level math skills to figure out that state-licensed pot stores are going to have empty shelves. A quick look at the long lines and inventory shortages experienced in Colorado will underline concerns about such problems arising in Washington. Somehow, 3 out of every 4 marijuana sales still being illegal wasn't exactly the way we had pictured legalization. But then what the hell do we know? We thought legalization meant you got to grow your own, but apparently not, at least if you listen to morons like Radical Russ Belville and Mark Emery, both of whom vocally supported the badly written I-502, and both of whom loudly and obnoxiously assailed those who dared to point out its shortcomings. They have no clue what they are doing, Seattle-based activist Steve Sarich of the Cannabis Action Coalition told Toke Signals on Monday. 3,000 growers' licenses and maybe only 22 to get licenses. There will be a lot of wailing and crying. We predict that it will only be a chosen few large growers that get licenses, Sarich said. That figure of 175 metric tons arrived at by RAND is more than twice the amount estimated by Washington's Office of Financial Management, which in 2012 guessed annual cannabis usage in the state at around 85 million metric tons. Now, those rates of consumption being roughly twice the previous estimates mean that sales should go briskly once Washington recreational marijuana stores finally open later this year. Washington state officials certainly think so. They're predicting sales of $1 billion. The Marijuana Business Factbook estimates initial sales of up to $500 million. But those figures could double if the RAND report is accurate. The data on marijuana consumption was compiled using an online questionnaire of the state's marijuana users. I was among the respondents, combined with some federal research. Amusingly, the survey included photos of various amounts of marijuana to help respondents remember the actual quantity they smoked each day. By the way, if that survey was correct, King County, where Seattle is located, smokes almost 1/3 of the weed consumed in the entire state. Mad props, King County. It's time to go this week. I hope that you decide to return and go through the news with us again next week. Until then, I think you should stay lifted. See you then.